The Americans' fault. They have destabilised Venezuela. They're arming the opposition. So it's them that should be condemned. We'll take more of your calls in a minute. But first, let's talk to Chris Williamson, Shadow Home Office Minister and Labour MP for Derby North. Chris, very good evening.
Good evening, Ian. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Good to have you back in the Commons. Now,
thank you.
Do you regard the Venezuelan regime as a dictatorship?
No, clearly it isn't. It's a democracy, and President Jimmy Carter, who observes elections throughout the world, has said it's probably the safest election anywhere in the world when he has observed elections in Venezuela. So to suggest that it's a dictatorship is a complete misnomer. It's simply not true.
Would you not say that one characteristic of a dictatorship is to lock up leaders of the opposition, and that's what Chavez did, and that's what Maduro has done?
Well, that's an oversimplification, Ian, if you don't mind me saying, of what's happened there. Clearly, as I've said previously, human rights are universal and inalienable. And when excesses take place wherever they happen, they have to be called out. But, you have to look at the circumstances as to, why people find themselves in prison. And indeed, this country has found itself on the wrong end of criticism from the United Nations.
It's never jailed an opposition leader. Enrique Capriles, the man that Maduro beat in 2013, he's just been banned for 15 years from political activities. Now, that wouldn't happen in a normal democracy, would it?
No, but in a normal democracy, you wouldn't have opposition leaders who were promoting violence. We wouldn't have opposition groups setting up burning roadblocks and burning government supporters to death and killing and stabbing people to death, as we've seen.
And who do you blame for that?
Well, clearly it's the right-wing opposition, isn't it? But I mean, there have been violence on both sides, and as Jeremy Corbyn has already said, he condemns violence wherever it happens. And I think we also need to look at the role of the United States of America. And some of the callers, I think, have actually made that point. But it is a fact that they do set aside a proportion in their budget every year to fund opposition groups in Venezuela. And they've been very destabilising. And all that's happened last week when they had the Constituent Assembly election was, in the Venezuelan constitution, as has previously happened in 1999 was the last time, and it's happened before that, a body of people are elected to look at and to amend the constitution. And clearly, Maduro, the president, has been overseeing a terribly chaotic country with the opposition unwilling to accept the democratic will of Venezuela.
He's been in power since 2013. Chavez was in power for many years before that.
Hang on, Ian. But look, Nicolas Maduro, well, indeed he was, yes, but elected, Nicolas Maduro was elected in...
By the narrowest of margins.
Well, it may be in a narrow margin. I mean, Theresa May's the Prime Minister here. She doesn't
I completely get that. But she's not locking up her opponents, is she? And she's not closing down newspapers and TV stations.
But nor are her... hold on, come on, look. Most of the media outlets in Venezuela are hostile to the government, but nor...
Well, and that means they should be closed down, does it?
Hold on. No, I'm not saying that, but nor is Theresa May having to deal with a violent opposition, which is setting up roadblocks that, supporters of the opposition... manufacturing shortages in the shops to try and destabilise the government. And look, you have to look back at history, Ian. Remember what happened in Chile in 1973? Precisely the same tactics were used by the opponents of Allende, supported by the CIA. This is not me making things up. This is a matter of historical fact and record. And part of that was to destabilise the government by manufacturing shortages in the shop to try and turn the populace against the democratically elected government. And it ended up in a military coup led by General Pinochet. And are we suggesting that, Venezuelans will be better with a Pinochet-type individual who genuinely was somebody?
I'm not suggesting that at all. But what I am suggesting is that they would be better off. They would be better off with virtually anyone.
Ian, hang on a minute. You're not letting me finish my point. Chile, Pinochet literally did torture and murder tens, if not hundreds of thousands of opponents. We're not in that situation here. And he was a dictator. Supported by America, supported by Margaret Thatcher. And it's a false dichotomy, it seems to me, to put these questions forward as to, do you support Maduro or do you support Tony Blair, which was put before me in the past, and I noted that you tweeted about that.
Do you support Maduro?
These are false dichotomies. What I support is a government that anywhere in the world that is actually trying to the interests of its people first, that is investing.
And you think Maduro is doing that? Do you?
Well, I think if you look again, don't sort of just listen to the hysteria in the Daily Mail.
I'm not. I would urge you to read this article from Ronaldo Trombetta in The Guardian, who says, let's call Venezuela what it is under Maduro, a dictatorship.
Well, he's wrong on that because he's well,
with respect, he comes from the country and you don't.
He may do, but well, that's very true. But there are many other people who live in Venezuela who would take a different view. But in terms of what your definition of a dictator is, Iain, I mean, as somebody who is democratically elected, it can hardly be a dictator.
I don't agree with that, because you would describe Hitler as a dictator, and he was elected, wasn't he?
Well,
and I know I've fallen into Ken Livingstone's trap there, but
you are a slightly bit. Yes, Godwin's.
But I mean, you can see the parallel, and do you not think that a regime which hang on a second, do you not think that regimes which jail political opposition leaders and opposition activists, and also close down newspapers and TV stations just because they don't like their editorial stance, do you not think those are the characteristics of a dictator?
You are oversimplifying the situation.
No, I'm not at all. I'm just giving you some facts which you find inconvenient.
No. Well, I think what you find the facts inconvenient as well, Iain, if I might say so, is because you don't live in Venezuela either.
I haven't said anything in this convection that isn't factual.
You're not on. Nor have I. You're not on the ground in Venezuela either, and you can't actually, ignore the fact or deny the fact that when Chavez was elected, there was appalling inequality and poverty in Venezuela.
And there isn't now?
And yes, there is, of course there is. But what I'm saying is that over the period of time that Chavez was in power, and then Maduro took over from him, obviously, but huge improvements were made, huge investments were made in education. And let's also remember, if, for example, in 2005, illiteracy was actually eradicated in Venezuela. That's a good thing, surely, investment in education. Huge investment in healthcare, and infant mortality dropped dramatically.
God, it's a veritable paradise, isn't it? Maybe we should all move there.
Oh, come on, Iain, that's ridiculous. I'm not saying
it is ridiculous.
And clearly there are massive problems now. And what I've called for is for all sides to get together, and for the United States of America, instead of actually acting in the...
How can all sides get together when the opposition leaders are in prison?
Just a minute, Iain. I would call on the United States of America, instead of their partisan approach and actually funding one side and seeking to undermine, they've got a very shady record, as you well know, in Latin America, to actually facilitate talks and a compromise to actually bring the sides together to actually get the country stabilised again. Let's also not forget that Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the known world, and therefore it seems to me that one of the reasons that the United States of America are paying such an interest is that they are very keen to enable their corporations to get control of the oil reserves again, as they used to have prior to Chavez coming to power in 1998, and use the revenues from the oil
before I let you go,
to actually invest in the economy and for ordinary Venezuelans. Now, clearly things have gone terribly wrong. I absolutely agree with you on that. I'm not an apologist for Nicolas Maduro anyway.
Well, you seem to be doing quite a good job on that front. But when Hugo Chavez died...
of what I'm saying.
Well, people can draw their own conclusions. But when Hugo Chavez died, he died with $15 million in his personal bank account. How do you think he made that money?
Well, I mean, you're telling me things that I'm not absolutely sure are correct. But what I would say is... Well,
let's just, for argument's sake, assume that it is correct.
Well, I'd sooner actually focus on the things that the
I'm sure you would.
Chavez government... Well, no, but I'm sure you don't want to, because you're an opponent of socialism, aren't you?
Okay, well, I'll let you go if you haven't got an answer to that question.
I don't think you've got an answer either, though, have you, Iain, about the fact that improvements were made in healthcare, were made in education, were made in improved jobs and housing and all the rest of it.
Well, clearly the Venezuelan people don't believe that to be the case, otherwise they wouldn't be demonstrating in the way that they are. Well, Chris, great to talk to you. We haven't had a meeting of minds, as you might imagine, but...
You didn't, frankly, have the balls to put country before party.